Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a topic that has hit every single one of us right in the wallet: the crazy global surge in prices and the massive fight to bring them back down to earth. And it all kicked off with a really simple question. It's the question we've all been asking ourselves at the grocery store, at the gas station, pretty much everywhere. It just felt like after 2021, the cost of living was suddenly on a rocket ship, right? Well, that wasn't just a feeling. It was a global economic reality. And the scale of this problem was, honestly, it was staggering. Just look at that number, 9.1%. That single figure tells you so much. That was the peak of inflation in the United States back in June of 2022. We hadn't seen anything like that in 40 years. It sent absolute shockwaves through economies all over the world and forced policymakers to scramble into action.
So to really understand this fright, we first have to get a clear picture of the enemy itself. What actually is inflation?
At its core, inflation is pretty simple. It just means that the money in your pocket, whether it's $1 or €1, buys less today than it did yesterday. It's this slow-motion erosion of your spending power. And when it gets out of control, it can throw entire economies into chaos. So what was it that lit the match on this global inflation fire? Well, it wasn't just one thing. That's what made it so tricky. It was a combination of several really powerful forces all slamming into the global economy at the same time.
First off, you had what economists call demand pull inflation. The easiest way to think about this is too much money chasing too few goods. As we all started coming out of the pandemic lockdowns, people were just ready to spend. But the factories and the shipping companies couldn't keep up, and that pushed prices way up. At the exact same time, we got hit with cost push inflation. This happens when the actual cost to make and move things goes up. We saw this big time with those tangled global supply chains and, of course, the huge spike in energy prices in 2022. That made everything from shipping a box to manufacturing a chair way more expensive. Then you've got to add in a psychological element: built-in inflation. And this is where things get really interesting. If everyone expects prices to keep going up, what happens? Well, workers demand higher wages to keep up. And then businesses raise their prices to cover those higher wages. It creates this self-fulfilling cycle, what's known as a wage price spiral. And what was pouring gasoline on all of this? Monetary factors. To handle the pandemic, governments and central banks had pumped a ton of money into the economy to help people and businesses. Now, that was crucial at the time, but all that extra cash in the system also helped fuel that huge surge in spending we talked about. So here's the thing that made this period so wild. It wasn't just one of these factors. It was all of them hitting at once. You had massive consumer demand crashing into broken supply chains. That alone would have been bad enough, but then it was supercharged by all that stimulus money and then made even worse by geopolitical shocks. It was, literally, the perfect storm. Okay, so you're a policymaker, you're faced with this monster storm. What do you even do? What tools do you have in the box to fight back? Well, the number one weapon, the frontline defense against inflation, is something called monetary policy. Basically, central banks can raise interest rates. When they do that, it gets more expensive for people and for businesses to borrow money. That cools down spending across the entire economy and hopefully brings inflation back down to earth. And this is where the really tough choices have to be made. That main tool, raising interest rates, yeah, it works pretty fast, but it comes with a huge risk. You could accidentally tip the economy into a recession. And the other options, cutting government spending, that gets massive political backlash. There are just no easy answers here, only a series of incredibly high-stakes trade-offs. So the big question is, did these tools actually work? Did they manage to tame the inflationary beast? Let's have a look at how this whole fight played out in the real world. First up, let's look at the United States. Like we saw, it was staring down the barrel of its highest inflation in 4 decades. This made it a huge test case for these economic policies. So the U.S. Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, they acted, and they acted aggressively. They jacked up interest rates from basically 0 to over 5%. And the effect was pretty dramatic. That terrifying 9.1% peak was wrestled all the way down to around 3%. But here's the really incredible part. They did all of that without crashing the economy. This amazing success is what economists call a soft landing. It's basically the holy grail for policymakers. You tame inflation without causing a deep recession and a spike in unemployment. Okay, now let's hop across the Atlantic. The European Union actually faced an even higher peak of inflation. For them, it was driven in a huge way by the massive energy crisis that followed the conflict in Ukraine. And what happened in Europe? A remarkably similar story. The European Central Bank also raised rates decisively, and that eye-watering 10.6% inflation rate fell all the way to a much more normal 2.5%. It really proved the power of a unified, forceful policy response. And you know, this success story wasn't just limited to the world's richest countries. In fact, some emerging markets like Chile and Brazil were incredibly effective. They used these really credible frameworks called inflation targeting, which helped manage what people expected to happen. And they got their own high inflation rates under control, which is a huge deal for economies that have historically really struggled with keeping prices stable. But look, bringing inflation down isn't the end of the story. It's not just a simple victory lap. The policies that are used come with some pretty significant risks, and they set up the big economic challenges of tomorrow. This really gets to the core of the problem for any policymaker. The medicine you use to cure inflation, those higher interest rates, it has a very painful potential side effect. You could slow down the economy so much that you actually cause a recession. It's a constant, incredibly difficult balancing act. And the fight is never really truly over. When you look ahead, new challenges are already popping up on the horizon. Things like instability in other countries, political pressure to loosen up on these tough policies too soon, and even new costs from things like climate change or shifts in globalization. It all just means that you can never let your guard down. And that brings us to the final critical question for today. It seems like the beast of inflation has been tamed, for now. But the next great challenge, the real tightrope walk, is figuring out how to get our economies growing strongly again without accidentally letting that beast right back out of its cage. That delicate balance, that's what's going to define the next chapter for all of us.